for joining the session today. We are recording the session so people can watch it back if they're not able to join. Now, feel free to add your questions for Douglas and Dale into the chat, and what we'll do is we'll have some time at the end for questions for them. This webinar will be with Broadlands, who in our annual complaint review were one of only 5 organisations in the report who had reduced its maladministration rate from last year. So they reduced it down from 78% to 42%. So in the webinar today, Douglas and Dale will be providing an overview of what changes they have made to impact the services that Broadlands offer and in turn reduce the mal rate, as well as share what they are doing so other landlords can learn and improve. So welcome to the webinar. My name is Victoria King. I'm one of the Sector Learning and Development Leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. So please could we ask that you just stay on mute, but feel free to keep your cameras on if you're happy to. We've invited Douglas and Dale here today, and really pleased to have them here. Their presentation will be around for 30-40 minutes, and then, as I mentioned, we'll go to questions for the rest of the hour, which I'll facilitate. There'll be an evaluation at the end of the session, so we can look at how we can improve future sessions, and I'll add the link to that into the chat at the end of the session as well. So, as I mentioned, we've got Dale Wordley, Assistant Maintenance Director, and Douglas Heathfield, Complaints Manager from Broadlands here. So, Dale and Doug, shall I hand over to you?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. So, today we have Doug and myself. We're going to do the presentation. So I'm going to start off, and then Doug's going to contribute as we move through. We did want to thank the Housing Ombudsman for inviting us. It's great to be recognised for some of the improvements that we're working incredibly hard on, and we're delighted so many people felt compelled to come and join the webinar as well. So over the next 5 minutes, we're going to share how Broadland has evolved its approach to complaint handling through learning and continuous improvement, and importantly, I think valuable feedback from our residents. We're not saying that we're perfect, and I think that's really important that we state that right at the beginning, but we are getting more things right than we did 12 to 24 months ago. We've made some considerable improvements which have no doubt made a difference for our staff and, more importantly, for our residents. So a little bit about Broadland Housing, if you don't know. We're a bit of a traditional housing association, providing more than 5,000 homes across Norfolk and North Suffolk since 1963. So we've been functioning for quite some time. And we're quite proud to be a member of the Homes for CAFE, a national alliance of housing associations dedicated to raising awareness of the needs of homeless people. We have a strong resident and community focus and a clear social purpose. And our belief is that everyone deserves a safe home that meets their needs. So we strive to deliver caring, effective and high quality services that are fair to all. And at Broadland, we view complaints not as problems, but really as opportunities to listen, learn and improve, and to put things right when they've gone wrong, and to rebuild some meaningful resident-landlord relationship trust back. So I just thought I'd start a little bit around our corporate strategy. So we're currently reviewing our corporate strategy. However, our corporate strategy firmly integrates well with the way that we approach complaints at Broadland. So here's a snip of one part of our strategy, which is entirely focused on residents being involved. So some of the parts of our corporate strategy as it currently sits is putting residents first. So complaints are handled, as we all know, in an empathetic way, always with the residents' experience front and centre. And as I'm sure we all know, listening to our residents is a crucial part of our complaint experience. We're committed, like I'm sure everyone else, to continuous improvement, and we do use complaints insights to actively refine and enhance our services we deliver. Creating a culture really focused around continuous improvement and learning continuously rather than as a one-off. So I think one of our key strengths is our transparency and accountability. So our leadership maintains strong oversight, ensuring that complaints lead to genuine improvements. And when I say leadership, I think What's particularly unique at Broadland, because I guess we're a smaller organisation, there's real buy-in and commitment from CEO all the way down to our front line-facing staff. So complaints is something talked about at all levels and in all forums. They are interested and committed to improving the complaint experience for all of our residents. Next. So engaging with our community. So clear communication ensures transparency and builds resident trust. One of the things we do, we have a program which we call Out and About. So basically what that is in a nutshell is we have, it's a commitment for all staff to attend an Out and About session at least once a year. And basically what we do is we attend our schemes where we have the lowest satisfaction or the most complaints, but ultimately where tenants are unhappy. And staff attending will be a mixture of staff from housing, repairs, asset management, even the CEO and executive team will attend. And what we do, we go out with pre-prepared questions and we ask those impartially for our residents to feed back, and that's all recorded and come back centralized, and our engagement team then pulls that together for us to learn from that and put actions in place. And that's all formally kind of tied up with our CEO sending a letter to every resident where we attend an Out and About session. And as we know, safe and quality homes, complaints inform us really of the quality of our homes and the safety improvements that we may need to invest in. We all know currently financially is tough in the sector. So when we're trying to prioritize where we spend our funds, complaints contribute to our budget bids in order to improve our services in the areas where our tenants are telling us improvements need to improve more. So our new corporate strategy is currently under consultation and will continue to support our vision of providing excellent service for our residents. So I watched a previous session, the webinar with Gen 2, and there were quite a few questions around structure. So we thought we'd get ahead of the game and answer those as part of our slides. So at Broadland, we have a different structure, I think, to what I'm traditionally used to. We have something that we call local delivery, which we commit to. So just wanted to explain a bit about local delivery because it's interesting how that ties in with our complaint team. So at Broadland, we have local delivery, which is led by myself and our assistant housing director. So within local delivery, we have everything, which includes repairs, cleaning, grounds, maintenance, state services, tenancy support, sheltered, housing with care, gypsy and traveller, and other housing related parts of the business. And all those parts of the business are kind of function between me and the housing director, and we work very closely to drive those forward. And what really is the local delivery part of it? Well, I think we deliver local services. So we have 4 delivery areas, so each managed by what we call a local delivery manager. So there's 4 local delivery managers, 2 of which falls in to the housing director's team and 2 fall within my team. And I think the important part of that is each of those local delivery managers then have a selection of all those departments that we talked about before, which are focused in that local delivery area. So, I mean, what that really does and offers value is that what we do at Broadland is that we offer a local service where our tenants will have the same staff attend all the time. So not only do our staff get used to the homes, they also get used to our residents, but also the area within where they're working. So how does that tie into complaints? Well, as you can see on the chart, Doug reports into my team, which forms part of the local delivery team. So I guess what that does is it gives Doug and Joe, who's our complaint handler, the opportunity really to feed back into the operational day-to-day delivery. And I find that really useful. So when we have team meetings, Doug is present for those team meetings. And whilst we have people in the room with expertise of housing, repairs, scheduling, and other functions within the business, Doug is always present and he's always able to challenge when we're doing service improvements and talk about what really could be different, or if we're proposing changes, how really we could tweak those more in line with what our tenants are feeding back. But I think importantly, what is helpful is when Doug's in those meetings, often you will know that people will always tell you that this is what tenants want, this is what our residents want, and people tell us that all the time. But Doug, working with our complaints every day, will know what tenants are telling us, and Doug will bring that to the table within those team meetings. And what also Doug does do as well is we get Doug involved in improvements. So we do a number of improvements all the time. And historically, when I worked in organizations, those improvements are always done by the department heads or people within those departments. So as an example, we're currently improving our scheduling system, which obviously is very much a repairs orientated part of the business. But Doug, being part of the team, is actively involved in that and feeding into that, how we can make sure that the improvements are tied to the complaints we're receiving day in, day out, to make sure actually are the improvements that we're trying to do going to make a real difference for the residents who live in our home. So how does complaints get handled in our organization? Well, we have a centralized team, which is we have one complaints manager and one complaints handler. So Doug will be speaking shortly, who's our complaints manager, and we have the lovely Joe, who's our complaints handler, who they work together very closely and manage, I would say, the bulk of our complaints. But what we do have, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, we have trained complaints managers. So we have 15 people trained within the organization to handle complaints. So nobody will handle a complaint unless they're trained, because there's a level which we require them to work within. So when complaints come in, Doug and Joe will decide where should this complaint sit. And the majority of them will sit within the complaints team, but there are really 3 examples of when they might not sit in the complaints team. One being when it requires a certain level of expertise, such as it could be lettings and allocations, or maybe damp and mold, where some technical aspects will help the investigation process. So in that case, our complaints team will have trained complaint handlers who they can lean onto. Other examples are we might get high profile or high risk complaints, and these are always allocated to assistant director, or sometimes the complaint levels exceed the capacity of the complaint handling team. So therefore, we then pass those on to our trained complaint handlers. So next slide, please, Doug. So this is our process in a nutshell, albeit very high level. So when a complaint comes in and is received, it's logged onto our CRM, and the central complaints team will make an initial contact with that resident and do an assessment to understand the details of that complaint. This will obviously be really important in terms of where they allocate that complaint, leaning back on my earlier point. So the central team may handle this complaint, or if they deem appropriate, they will reallocate to one of our trained complaint handlers. So our complaint handlers will always allocate, and they will always acknowledge. So all acknowledgements are completed within the complaint handling team. And they will investigate the ones which are allocated to themselves, or if they're allocated to a trained complaint handler, they will investigate and obviously provide the response, all within the guidelines in terms of response times. But I think underpinning our process is that the complaints team will manage compliance. And by compliance, I think largely when we're using other complaint handlers, it is about making sure we respond and acknowledge within timeframes. Now, acknowledge we don't need to worry about, because our complaint handling team will always ensure that they're acknowledged within timeframe. But should they be allocated to a trained complaints handler, our complaints handling team will give them a gentle nudge occasionally to make sure we're on track to respond within timeframe. So moving on to what really matters. Now, I think we've really driven over the last 18 to 24 months the importance of complaints. I think this is supported, I think, from the Housing Ombudsman in terms of there's lots of guidance, there's lots of communication about what good looks like. I think that helps. We share that with the teams. But our tenants will tell us when we're not getting things right. But crucially, we we will then use that, and we'll use that to guide and improve the way that we work as a business. But that's really important to us because, as we know, whilst we have a dedicated complaints team now, that's a resource, and that is a drain on the business. Every time we get a complaint, it does distract people from doing their day to day. So it really matters that we try to reduce those numbers, and that's why we're invested not heavily just into our complaints team, but in the processes. So I think when residents see that we're responsive and we're accountable, they start to grow trust back with us. And as we know, trust takes a long time, but if they had experiences of a bad service for a long period of time, that can even take longer. But I think there's always an opportunity to improve a bad experience for our residents. And for me, when I'm dealing with a complaint, I think as you're going through that, that's what ultimately I'm trying to achieve. And if you do get the residents who have had a lot of complaints due to a lot of problems, I think that's where it's really rewarding when you get it right. And I think from my experience, most of our residents are very reasonable and mostly understanding. So we handle each complaint with an opportunity to strengthen our relationship with our residents and address concerns. In return, they help us become more efficient, responsive, and effective in delivering our service. I think this is a win-win. Because I think our tenants will receive an improved service and things are put right. But I think that's a win for us as an organisation because we can build trust, resolve the issues, and have the opportunity to learn.
Excellent. So morning, everyone. I'm Doug. I'm the complaints manager at Broadland. So I just kind of wanted to start off with looking at the complaints improvement project that we did. I think that's a really kind of pivotal point for us. Kind of when I joined, it wasn't too long before we started that project and kind of got involved in that. So I'm just going to talk through that because I think we've identified lots of improvements through that. So that was a really kind of good project. So we used an improvement model from the Universal Improvement Company. We have staff trained at Broadland on leading and delivering on those sessions, and our complaints improvement project was centered around that approach. And the project was essential because it allowed us to pause, reflect, and take a good look at our existing complaints processes at the time. We wanted to ensure that we're able to comply with the complaint handling code, but also to genuinely improve our resident experience and to also improve our internal processes and make them more efficient and effective. So we undertook a structured process review, and it was over several dedicated sessions, and we engaged colleagues from across the organisation. The sessions involved really engaged and detailed brainstorming sessions, and we completed some flowchart mapping of the complaints process as it was at the time. And we completed some group activities as well, kind of to help us along the way. And some of that was looking at sort of, as I say, the brainstorming and the analysis to begin with, using collaborative methods from the improvement methodology. And we were asking questions to kind of gain an understanding of where are we, and that was, we kind of looked at what was working well, what are the obvious issues that we, those who were involved in the project were aware of, coming into it from their knowledge and experience, what quick improvements could we look to make, kind of immediate implementation of those kind of quick win improvements, and what larger, more strategic changes were necessary to align ourselves with the complaint handling code as well. And in doing that, we kind of looked at what our residents were telling us, and we used things like the tenant participation survey results and other feedback that we collect through complaints, and through kind of satisfaction feedback, which is kind of more transactional from repairs and things. And we also just looked at what our current data analysis tells us. So we obviously at the time we already had data, so we just was looking at that to see what that could tell us as well. And through the approach, the team identified several clear strengths, but also some notable gaps that we needed to plug. So some of our strengths included having specialist complaint handlers, as Dale mentioned earlier. They have that kind of real in-depth specialist knowledge and experience, kind of from across multiple areas of the organisation. And I think for us, that feels like a really unique and beneficial part of our structure. We think that's a good strength for us. And we also had valuable existing data, as I've just mentioned, which, provided us with reporting capabilities for our existing systems, so CRM and Power BI. And in terms of the process mapping part, once we'd done our brainstorming sessions, we then went on to look at mapping out the process, so step by step of the complaint handling journey. And we did this with reference to the current policy and procedure as it was at the time, and utilizing the group's knowledge and experience to walk through scenarios. And when we did that exercise, that was really when we started to see where the gaps were and any kind of areas that we didn't have covered in our process, particularly around sort of the use of the system to kind of record keeping of the complaints, putting all the files in one place and just capturing the whole complaint journey in one place, and ensuring the consistency, following of processes, and looking at transparency in our current resource as well. So that they were the areas that we identified as we needed to provide some kind of attention to those areas. And when I talk about resource, I think quite quickly after this project, we picked up on our new complaint handler, Joe. So we kind of had that identified at that point in time. And I'll cover more about kind of what we identified and what we've put in place as we go. So the first point to note, and I think it was focal at the time, was that we identified quite quickly the right thing to do when approaching this project would be to assess ourselves against complaint handling code. So we did those kind of in line with each other at the time. We were looking at the project would be informed by the complaint handling code and our assessment of where we are at in terms of compliance with that code. It seemed the logical place to begin at the time, and it really did actually help us to identify some of the gaps that we have. So we did identify the need to categorize our complaints better, separating issues clearly into categories. So previously we were kind of recording reactive repairs in with planned maintenance, and we found that we had some categories missing that we couldn't easily identify. So things like damp and mold, health and safety and building safety are all quite key categories that we can now capture. And we also found that some of our residents who contact us about their complaints, when we were speaking to them as part of their complaint, they didn't recall actually raising the formal complaint. So there was identified some clear confusion about a service request and a formal complaint. And we found also that we had functionality within our system to support things like sending letters directly out of the CRM, which would save administrative steps in terms of uploading letters and things. So the system could have automated some of that work for us, and it wasn't being used. I think it was kind of training gap there, but we're kind of looking more at that point. Just that's gone through another cycle of improvement recently, and we've identified we need to work more on the functionality of that. So we're currently working on that. That's another step that will improve our efficiencies. One of the main things I think we did, as I touched on a minute ago, we've identified the importance of capacity and workload of complaint handlers. So as much as there is the strength there is also the consideration of everybody having their workloads and whether that would impact our ability to respond within timeframes. And I think we identified that providing we had a sort of well functioning central service in terms of myself and the complaint handler, with that kind of ability to pick up the bulk of those complaints and only distribute the more technical ones specific to their areas, as Dale touched on earlier, that has enabled us then to obviously manage the resource and manage the distribution of complaints more equally. So the other thing that we did look at as well was categorization of the complaints. So how we categorize them, we needed more clarity and detail, because that would really help us with our reporting capabilities and also to help us understand complaint trends at a glance. So just being able to look at that report and understand what the hotspots are that are kind of causing the complaints at that specific moment, so we can identify where the issue is and kind of hone in on that quite quickly to try and reduce the issue and prevent recurrence. So we agreed it would be much more transparent as well for us to raise all of our complaints directly into the CRM, straight onto the customer record first and foremost. That again, it enables better record keeping, and in terms of monitoring and compliance as well. It's better that it was there and then administered, and we've recognised the resident doesn't want to make that complaint, but it was raised rather than for it not to have been necessarily raised into the CRM, and then obviously having to retrospectively note that the escalation has happened from a result of a service request. So it's kind of working from the complaint as the center point and detailing which way it's going to go based on the resident's wishes at that moment in time. So that covered that. The recommended improvements, we kind of touched on some of those as we went, but we have now managed to categorize and theme in terms of the process we followed as the project. Once we'd kind of done the gap analysis and identified them, we started looking at recommended improvements. So we categorized our findings, and we kind of created general themes, and we made the suggestions for the improvements based on those. And as I've kind of already touched on, really, some of the key topics, complaint recording and monitoring, were one of the themes. Some of the system improvements we looked at, and also kind of resources, so that additional requirement for resource. And in terms of then moving on from there, we looked to start implementing improvements. So we've explored moving towards, as I mentioned, integrating those letters into CRM, and that's moving into stage 2 or phase 2 as we speak. And I think kind of recognizing that complaints were sometimes not being kind of raised, and trying to address that confusion of a service request versus a formal complaint. We've emphasized clear guidance, which distinguishes service requests from formal complaints, and it ensures that residents are fully understanding of which process will be taken forward, and that is absolutely led by the resident. And there are times when we don't get it right, but those are always going to be picked up, and this is where we found this as an improvement in our internal process. And as Dale mentioned earlier, the triage point that we have within our complaint process enables us to make that initial contact to establish whether or not there is a formal complaint, and give that resident the opportunity to tell us more about the complaint as well. So it's a really good point where we can capture more information as well, understand what the residents need from us as part of that complaint, and kind of talk them through the process and how to provide us any evidence and things like that that they may want to provide us with. So we have now obviously also, in terms of the system changes, we've made some improvements on our system based on the findings of the project, and that we've kind of split them into 2 phases now. So we're currently now working on an additional phase. So you'll bear with me on the first phase, which we've implemented already. We now capture additional information within our CRM. So when we log complaints, we can now log the actions, any outstanding actions that other areas of the organisation need to deliver as part of that complaint. And with the, as I said, the second phase will allow us to potentially look at allocating staff members, setting timescales for completion, and monitor the completion of those actions as well. That's the kind of key aim for the functionality around that. We can record and learning points. So any learning points that are identified within the complaint, we can now record that directly into the complaint notes in the CRM, and we'll be able to pull that from a Power BI report and start to analyze those. And we're kind of looking again, phase 2, how we can kind of build in more analytical ability around that as well, sort of from a monitoring perspective. For each complaint, compensation awards, so we can record compensation awarded within that complaint. That's going to help us to understand, give us that richer data for analysis. So for example, we might know that we're spending X amount compensation on repairs in relation to complaints in relation to repairs, for example, and we can understand more based on the theme of that complaint. So it might be damage caused to possessions in the home, accidental damage by an operative, for example, and we can kind of get an idea of where we're kind of spending more money on compensation that way. The other points that we kind of covered in terms of the implementation of improvement is staff now receive ongoing quarterly complaint training. We designed the sessions and they're kind of tailored to keep up to date with all the latest best practice guidance coming from the Ombudsman Service, and also a great opportunity for all the complaint handlers in the room to share knowledge across the group. I also carry out regular training with all the customer engaged areas of Broadland to keep them up to date with policies and procedures and all our compliance matters. And that's kind of looking at our customer service teams, income and tenancy support, particularly attending things like neighbourhood away days has been helpful. I attend local delivery area meetings. So I don't attend them all, so weekly meetings, but I do attend regular now. I'm trying to get to them each sort of quarterly so that I can speak with the local delivery teams of each area. As Dale mentioned earlier as well, I attend team meetings with Dale and his team, which is kind of the wider local delivery linked in with Dale. And as well, the all operatives event day we do. So all our operatives will attend an event day, kind of catching up on all things, updates from Broadland. And that's another kind of point where we can talk about complaints and kind of keep our operatives informed as well of kind of best practice. And beyond that, I do keep an open door policy at all times, and that's for our staff, or all staff members, and anyone with questions around complaints or anybody just wishing to discuss any complaints. And I know our complaint handler Jo is the same. She'll talk to anybody from Broadland who wishes to kind of approach us and seeking advice around a complaint or what do we do next with this particular thing. We're kind of there for that kind of advice, and we're always happy to help. But these improvements, they've enabled a much more robust reporting for us, and they've provided us with much more clear oversight on our compliance, improved our compliance with timescales, compensation consistency we can have a better look at, as I said, and our overall complaint handling performance as well. But it does remain part of our ongoing journey. So we've got more improvements planned for the future, particularly around the digital enhancements, data and monitoring, and having that clearer tracking of each element of a complaints life cycle. We're working on phase 2 of that right now, actually, and we expect as well in the near future a kind of pre-built Power BI report, which will help us with some of the more automated, helpful key insights for monitoring and things like performance, timescales, trends, and other key compliance areas. We will have a BI report that focuses our attention to those key points. And just moving forward from that, in terms of what we think we're doing well right now, and I'll kind of cover some of that off, because I think at Broadland, transparency is completely fundamental to us. We really aim to ensure that our residents know exactly how the complaint process works and what to expect, and we do that by kind of publishing as much information as we can within our website, and of course, once they are engaged in the complaints journey, having those conversations and keeping them informed and talking them through what they can expect. And we have our letters templated also to explain all of the next steps of the process, and giving the Ombudsman Service details, all the kind of stuff that I think many of us will be doing naturally from the complaint handling code anyway. But that is a really good opportunity for us as well, just to get as much information to our residents as we can, to be totally transparent about what to expect. we're completely committed to learning from all of our complaints. So we want to hear from our residents, and we want to use each complaint as an opportunity to learn. And I think even where we, maybe not necessarily fail to follow a process, we still want to look at that for opportunities, because although we may not fail to follow a process, it might be that our process isn't working for everybody, and that also could become a trend. So it's also just kind of thinking wider than, have we got it right on this occasion or not? It kind of is more keeping that resident focus throughout. And in fact, I actually meet with the assistant directors separately now on a monthly basis and explore our current learning trends from complaints to ensure that any improvement opportunities and improvement plans are built around what our residents are telling us. An example of that would be Dale, who has a repairs improvement plan, and that's been developed from lots of different insights, but one of those is complaints. So our specialist complaint handlers, who understand their respective service areas thoroughly, providing those kind of investigation responses to our residents, I think that is something we do well. Again, that's very unique for us, and that is one of our key strengths, and I think that would be one of, in terms of, I believe that gives our residents a really kind of helpful and supportive complaint process, and gives that opportunity for a really good outcome, because they are, the person dealing with that complaint has that really kind of extensive knowledge and operational knowledge as well of that area of their team. And then in reverse to that, it's also feeding back, because of their involvements in that team, that those trained handlers hearing those complaints and understanding what the resident is telling them is kind of them keeping a finger on their pulse of how residents feel about the services they're delivering as well. So it's kind of working both ways. And the other thing, and I won't cover it too much because we talk about this a bit later, but our leadership's involvement at stage 2 of complaints, I think that's a really, really unique thing. I've not been anywhere else where that is kind of, we have a leadership approach to stage 2. And I think Broadland are really proud to be able to offer that level of commitment and assurance to the residents. And yeah, as I said, we'll talk about that part more a bit later. So I'm going to move on to some case studies that we looked at recently, which were from some fairly recent housing ombudsman determinations. So I'll kind of talk through the issues that were posed within the complaint, a little bit of background, what the ombudsman findings looked like, and what our response and rationale was behind it all, and also look at some of the improvements that may have come off the back of those as well. So the first one is an example based around an ASB case. It was ASB management, and there were some other underpinning kind of points that were within the complaint, and I'll just run through that. So this particular resident had raised several concerns regarding our handling of an antisocial behaviour complaint, which was particularly around unsent internal letters, and they were disclosed by mistake, and the use of our unreasonable complaints policy came into question, and requesting changes to staff who manage their tenancy, and concerns also around loft installation. So they were the key points of the complaint. And the background there is essentially the residents' main frustration centred on an internal draft letter that was never actually sent to them, but it was accidentally disclosed to them, and that caused some distress and raised some questions about our impartiality. And the resident also felt our application of the unreasonable complaints policy was unfair, alleging potential bias and discrimination from staff members involved in managing the tenancy. And additionally, there were separate concerns raised around, as I said, loft ventilation, which we addressed through our standard repair process. The Ombudsman's findings on that case, they identified that there was a clear service failure regarding our disclosure of the unsent letter. We should never have sent that, and it should never have been shared externally at all. However, after thorough investigation, they found no maladministration in how we applied our unreasonable complaints policy. There's no evidence of bias or discrimination from our staff, and they concluded that our management of the loft ventilation issue was also appropriate. So how we kind of responded to this particular complaint and the findings. So we fully accepted the Ombudsman's findings, of course, and regarding the unsent letter, we acknowledged that mistake openly and took immediate kind of corrective action to that. Regarding the staff changes, we carefully reviewed the decision and policy and confirmed that we felt they were applied fairly and appropriately, and we requested additional evidence regarding the allegations of misconduct and aim to maintain the confidence in our staff's actions as well. So some of the improvements that we looked at from that particular case were a review on the ASB recording practice. Staff received additional training and around improving their understanding of complaint handling and reinforcing the importance of confidentiality and data protection. There was guidance improvements made around staffing requests, and while we acknowledge residents' preferences, we did make it clear that we couldn't routinely commit to making staff changes due to our resource constraints, and to ensure a fair service to all of our residents as well. So that kind of summarised that case study. And the next one is in relation to solar panels. The issue was that the resident requested approval to install solar panels on a communal roof of their property to help reduce energy costs, and they approached us hoping to be able to lower the energy bills through installing solar panels. However, the area identified for installation was actually a communal property, and it was outside of the boundaries within that residence tenancy agreement. And so the Ombudsman findings there were that they absolutely agreed with the decision to refuse the permission and recognised that it was justified and clear and in accordance with the terms of the residence tenancy. In addition to that, the Ombudsman also positively noted our proactive approach in providing alternative support, which reflected on obviously a tenant resident focused ethos. And what we did there is in response, we based the refusal on the terms of the tenancy and outlined the reasons behind that. So, of course, being a communal area, we couldn't provide the permission to, individually modify or use private installations on that area. But we also showed our understanding of their needs, and we proactively provided budgeting advice and utility management and support. And we provided practical energy saving guidance as alternative ways for the resident to achieve similar benefits. And the third case study that we've done is on another one, which was further to a mutual exchange where a resident had reported a gas safety concern due to a leak, and that was on a non-standard hob installation. So at the point of the mutual exchange, the resident accepted responsibility for the non-standard kitchen appliances, and the standard gas and electrical safety checks were carried out. Our surveyor also had attended and conducted a visual inspection of the property at the time, but didn't obviously find any immediate issues. Unfortunately, within days of that exchange taking place, the resident discovered a concealed gas leak, which was linked to the non-standard installation gas hob, which is something that the initial visual inspections and the original gas and electrical inspections wouldn't have reasonably identified. And so the Ombudsman looked at this case and concluded the inspections were conducted appropriately, and given the limitations, of course, within a visual inspection, they also recognised that the concealed nature of that issue, and they also acknowledged our positive and rapid support and response to the problem once we identified it. So how we approached that was that we were totally open and transparent in how we communicated to that resident about all the limitations of visual inspections and all the reasons why the issue was, initially not detected. And then what we did in recognition of the distress that was caused is provided £250 towards a replacement hob. We expedited a planned kitchen refurbishment, which would have addressed the kind of underlying issue, and then also awarded £400 compensation for the residents' inconvenience and distress. So in terms of improvements made, we looked to strengthen our inspection protocols, and we particularly around mutual exchange inspections and where they involve any non-standard installations. So we're much more clear on those now. So we much more clearly define resident responsibilities regarding non-standard fixtures in our tenancy guidelines, and we ensure residents have full understanding of their obligations at the point of signing either an exchange agreement or a new tenancy agreement. There was also enhanced staff training around the kind of explanations around the visual inspection limitations as well, just to explain that it's a visual inspection and there may be some things that are concealed that we can't reasonably or practically see from a visual inspection point of view, and we do that just to maintain transparency as well. So that's kind of concluding those case studies, and I'll go back on now over to the next slide and look at a little bit more about the role of leadership within our complaints.
Okay, so Doug alluded to the fact that we have what I think is a very positive stage 2 panel at Broadland. So our stage 2 panel consists of either a executive director or the CEO who will chair the meeting, and then we will have a non-executive board member and a resident board member where possible, which I think shows a great level of commitment and also ensures continuity in terms of making sure our exec team and our board members are aware of what's happening and offering them the opportunity to listen to a resident when we're not able to conclude at stage 1. So the resident has the opportunity to meet the panel before it all takes place. And again, there's a different perspective, a new look at that complaint, and there's a lot of learning come from that process, which is fed back down to the operational team. And I think our leadership overall is we provide, Doug and I provide a lot of reports to our leadership team, and I meet with our board member responsible for complaints on a monthly basis, which offers a new level of scrutiny and an insight from his perspective where he can ask questions which he might not normally get at board level. So next slide, please, Doug. Okay, so we use the complaint handling code. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because time's running away. But what I would say is, as Doug alluded to earlier, we have absolutely embraced the complaint handling code, and we feel is a great tool to help guide us to where we need to be with our complaints. And Doug, next slide, please. So the key lessons, I think we covered all these already, but we are proactive with our learnings from complaints. We don't just do one-off learning. I meet Doug specifically for learning once a month in my repairs role. We explore those, and I build those into the action plan. We all know communication is a big challenge, whether it's internally or externally. So we really try and focus to keep our tenants informed in terms of where we are with their complaint. We have very strong buy-in from leadership, and I think that was fundamental in our change in the way that we handle complaints. We've embraced the complaint handling code, and we will reassess against that ongoing, as will all of you, but we do that in a very transparent way. And I think the big point that I would say is create capacity. Without Doug and Joe, our complaints team, we wouldn't be where we are today. Doug is able to keep focused on complaints, and for a small organization like us, many of our staff members wear more than one hat, so therefore they are juggling priorities, whereas Doug is laser focused on making sure that we are compliant in terms of the way we handle complaints. And I think the last point on this is face the facts. You know, we had to sit down as part of our improvement review and really dig deep in terms of our performance, and you know, hold a mirror up against ourselves and challenge ourselves to where we are today and what we need to do differently. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. And we recognise that, as Doug alluded to, we are now building the next stage of improvements for our system, because ultimately we want to improve an efficient system which will enable our complaint handlers to work effectively in providing the best complaint handling service for our tenants. And finally, on to the last slide. Doug. Oh, there's a delay, I think. The last slide is questions. I see some questions coming in, but I'll hand back so they can be facilitated.
Amazing. Thank you so much, guys. That was really, really interesting. I really liked how you talked about, I think it was about slide 12, you talking about self-assessing the code and how that was actually really useful. I know you have to do it, but it's a really useful tool to actually make sure that you were compliant, but also help identify those gaps and those issues so you could like fill those and look at amending processes and stuff. Thought that was really good. And the other thing I obviously really liked was slide 15. You talked about using the complaint system to learn and use them actually as a really good opportunity to look for trends and like wider than that individual complaint to try and, you know, drive service improvement. And I love the golden thread for shaping services as well. Brilliant. And Dale, you talked about meeting up with the member responsible for complaints. How good's that? That's fantastic. Do you find it really useful to meet up with them?
Yeah, I mean, I do it more than once a month, actually, because I meet him separately. So it's just myself and him. And also I meet him with my line manager once a month as well. So we meet him twice a month.
Yeah.
Doug writes a report, which we talk through, and then he'll basically ask as many questions as he has on his mind. But he's able to bring to those sessions the questions that might be asked at board, which me and Doug might not necessarily be receiving back. So I think that's a real good way of keeping connected with the board. I think it works fantastic.
Yeah, brilliant. And Doug, you said about, you know, going to senior management, letting them know about the trends you're spotting in the complaints, make sure you've got that organisational oversight and that and leadership are involved. So it's really good as well.
Absolutely, yeah, that is really good, and that does absolutely inform those action plans, as I mentioned. So, yeah, we do like that method.
Right, we've got a few questions then, and I know we've only got 6 minutes left, so I'm going to quick fire questions. So the first question was from Claire James. She asked, what CRM system do you use?
We use an in-house system called Broadlands Business System, which enables us to make the improvements because it belongs to us.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks, Claire. Tina asked, well, she actually said, I really like that you have SMEs that are trained in complaint handling with capacity issues at times and complex complaints. This seems very valuable. And leading on from that, we've had a question from Ria, which is, what type of training was provided to your complaint handlers?
So the kind of training that is provided is it kind of looks at oversight of kind of what the kind of approach to complaint handling is. So we look at kind of, we might analyze some letters and kind of take those into the session and talk about you know, looking at consistency with complaint handling, making sure that we're all kind of using a similar kind of approach with our, you know, how we approach the investigation. It's kind of really a knowledge sharing training session where we kind of look at what others are doing that's working well for them, and we'll just share and deliver that back into the session. And I know I did a recent session sort of looking more at complaint handling code with all the handlers to just kind of recap on that and where we were at. So that's something else we revisit regularly, and we'll continue to do that as well. And yeah, I think for complaint handlers, that probably is where we're at the moment. We tailor it based on if our, you know, it depends on what the complaint handlers are saying as well. If they've got things they would like some clarity on, that will be included in that quarter's package. So it's just tailored to what the needs are, any questions or gaps or concerns at that time.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Does that answer your question, Ria?
Yeah, that's fine. So it sounds like it's sort of internal training based. Yeah.
Yes, it is. Yeah, but then I would include in that any external training I particularly pick up on. If I've done some resources on the Centre for Learning, I'll take that into that session, and I'll also recommend others to utilise the Centre for Learning as well, and recommend kind of training content.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks for the shout out for the Centre for Learning there. Brilliant. We've had some questions which are really, really similar, so I'll sort of group them. So the first part of it is, could you share your complaint volumes, service requests, and S1 and S2s?
Yeah, in the 23-24 financial year, we had 256 stage 1 complaints, and 12 of those were escalated to stage 2.
Brilliant. And Bobby's question from leading on from that is, on average, what's the number of stage 1s and stage 2s per month?
I mean, we've seen a little bit of up and down over the Christmas period, but I would say on average, probably about 1 a day, Doug. Yeah.
Great,
Yeah, that's accurate.
And I think that answers your question as well, Manita, which is about sharing the number of complaints you deal with. Ria's asked another question, which is, are you able to give some information on the levels of ombudsman investigations you're getting? And on average, how many complaints do you receive a month, and how many HOS cases annually? I'm not sure if that's to us or whether that's to Doug and Dale. How many HOS cases do you have average?
Yeah, I would say probably we'll probably receive somewhere between 5 and 10, and they may be inquiries, and maybe 2 or 3 of those across this financial year have gone to investigation and determination. So yeah, that kind of varies a little bit with the inquiries, but they don't all go to investigation, I would say. Does that help?
I think it was yours, Barbara. I think you did say it is for Broadlands to answer. Does that answer your question, Barbara? Okay, whilst you're thinking about it, the final question then is from Elizabeth. She said, would you be able to share the questionnaire you used when you hold meetings with tenants, please?
Yes, we can send that over.
Brilliant. If you want to send it to me, I can send it out to the attendees at the webinar today. So
Brilliant.
Yes, great. Oh, and in answer to Elizabeth Morris, this is the questionnaire we use when we go, oh, thank you, Joe. Joe's popped it in the chat. Look at that, fantastic.
Thanks, Joe.
Great. Right, so dot on time. My last thing to say is I hope you enjoyed the webinar today. Thank you so much, Doug and Dale, for your presentation. Really, really interesting. And thank you to everybody for your questions. I popped in a link to an evaluation form for the session today. So if you are attending, please do fill that in, because we want to make sure that these are relevant and good for you guys going forward. The next webinar we'll be holding is on the 22nd of April. It's with Abbeyfield. It's also about our annual complaint review, because Abbeyfield were one of 2 organisations in our annual complaint review report without mal findings. So feel free to have a look on the Centre for Learning and sign up for that one as well. Just to say thank you so much again, Dale and Doug. That was really brilliant, and thank you everybody for attending.
Thanks for having us. Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
Thank you, guys. That was great. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.